But having, seen a series of these operations from 2015 when we did the Yemen operation, Operation Rahat, actually this was the most dangerous operation. It was an operation where people put their lives at risk, where there were quite a few embassies in Khartoum. When the fighting started, most of the embassies left very quickly. Our embassy stayed. Our embassy stayed because there were Indians in Khartoum. And I finally had to, when all the Indians had left, even then my embassy was there. My embassy was there because my ambassador and his team had that sense of responsibility. They said, no, there's still people stuck in different places. And I finally, on the day when the ceasefire broke down, I actually had to order them saying, you're putting your lives at risk. Please relocate within Sudan. And the kind of challenges, and bit by bit, story will come out. You actually had an Air Force plane land at a, I would say, not an unprepared airstrip, but an airstrip which was not regularly functional, in very poor condition, where a plane previously coming in had been shot up, had been fired at and hit. And yet these people took the risk of landing there with very little help from the, I think the air traffic controller was non-existent, I think if my understanding is right. So they landed there in a sense using old-fashioned skills, taking a big chance. And, to me, whether the courage shown by the people landing was only matched with the courage shown by the embassy staff on the ground who had rounded up the people and taken them there through very difficult circumstances so that they could be very quickly loaded on the plane, and the embassy people came back. And those who left. Now, I say this to you because, sitting here, and sometimes, as I said, there are times we can speak about it, we can share details. There are times when people need to trust the government, need to understand today that this is a government which has systems in place, which has a commitment to citizens abroad. So, in fact, when Sudan, the fighting started, I was myself traveling. And within a matter of a few hours, the Prime Minister contacted me. He wanted to, I was in Africa at that time, contacted me. He wanted to confirm. We had set up a crisis management group. Our systems were coming in place. We were reaching out through the ambassadors to all the countries concerned. And that we were getting the Air Force and the Navy ready for movement for all of this to happen. Now, the whole operation was actually hugely complex. I'm speaking of 17 flights and 5 ships, but that is the final end of the operation that you are seeing. Actually, the people out there, the team handling it, had to hire buses, get petrol in the black market because the petrol, fuel was very difficult. Had to negotiate checkpoints. I think some of you would have seen stories in the newspaper of what the people who came out. They spoke about being threatened, about being robbed, about being assaulted. Whatever they went through, those who stayed behind took much more than that. And yet it was their job to keep it running. And, during this period, I would say maybe we had 60 to 70 buses. And people actually, the last lot of people traversed through the length of Sudan to finally reach the port through a very long route because they were avoiding the fighting. And we had another team which had to come from, we had people from Nigeria come to Chad and extricate people from the western side of Sudan. So why am I sharing these details with you? 2 reasons. Because so many of us go abroad, work abroad, live abroad at times, this is going to be a challenge for which we have to be always prepared. And when I look back at this last 10 years, just this year was Operation Kaveri, last year was Operation Ganga, year before was Operation Devi Shakti in Afghanistan. In fact, pretty much it is 10 years. Every year we've had at least one major operation. We had Operation Maitri with Nepal earthquake, we had Operation Rahat, we had Sankat Mochan in southern Sudan. So, in a way, I come back to what I'm telling you. Why does the world matter to us? The world matters to us because we are today more and more present in the world. And we have to have the relationships. For an evacuation like this, one part of it is the bit I shared with you. How many buses, how many planes, how many ships. One part of it is also the phone calls you make, the help you get from others. The Saudis, for example, helped us hugely. I had to call up the British because that particular airfield where our plane landed at that point of time was controlled by the British. I had to ask Egypt for help because some people went north. South Sudan because they went south. Chad because we had an extrication party out there. UAE because they had a very big influence on some of the forces who were fighting out there. So today we have to have in good days the relationships, the capabilities, the footprint, so that God forbid something happens. A country cannot start preparing from at the moment when disaster strikes or perils emerge. We have to be prepared well before so that if something unforeseen or dangerous or catastrophic happens, to the extent any country can be ready, that country has to be ready. So for me, what I am doing abroad in terms of relationship building is one part of a much bigger change which this country is going through, where we are building capabilities, where is setting in place systems. And so, when we speak today of a changing world and a changing India, I use these two examples, COVID and this, Operation Kaveri. These are examples today of how different parts of the government came together. That if today a foreign minister can stand and say, we did this in that country and did this in this country, I can say that because the degree of support that I get from my other colleagues, the coordination within the government. Often I get asked saying, you're constantly dealing with one issue after another. What is the difference? And I've been in this business for 45 years. What is the difference today? Why didn't it happen earlier? Why didn't it happen so effectively and so rapidly earlier? I think one part of it is, as I said, this coordination and capability. But the other part of it is the motivation. I find actually, as someone who spent all his life working in the government, except 1 year, the change within the system itself is important for citizens to recognize. That if I have an ambassador who will not leave until every Indian has left, or, when we had this Operation Ganga going on, the last lot of students, they were in a very, very, I would say, dangerous position because they were in a city. Every time they tried to get out of their hostel, there would be some firing, they'd go back in. And finally, when we had arrangements in place, the students by that time were not willing to take a chance because they worried if they came out and somewhere something went wrong, they would not be able to be extricated. So to give them that courage, we actually had to send 2 senior officers from Delhi, saying you go all the way to Ukraine, go through that fighting, reach that place, tell the students, see, I've come from India, now come with me, get on that bus and come back with me. Now, the point I'm making here is when I asked for people, I had no shortage of volunteers. And I sent 2 very senior people. And, when they were going, I still remember, I speak Russian. So they were going through checkpoints. Because when there's a war, when there's a conflict, there are checkpoints. At every checkpoint, they would get the same question. Everybody is traveling from east to the west, trying to run away from the conflict. Why are you crazy guys going towards the conflict? And every time they would give some story because they didn't want to reveal that they were actually going on a mission to link up with the students. But I mentioned this to you because the motivation today